the record the Bourgoin trial, and I hope everyone had a great lunch. Looks like we have everyone here, so.
Thank you, Judge. The state would call Dr. Elizabeth Bunda.
You solemnly affirm that the evidence you shall give relative to the cause now under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, under pains and penalties of perjury.
I do.
Please be seated. Pull up to the microphone and speak into the mic.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you start by just saying your name and spelling your last name, please?
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Bundock. It's Bundock.
Thank you. And how are you employed?
I'm the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner here in Vermont
How long have you been in that position?
since 2007.
Okay. And how can you describe your position? What does a Deputy Chief Medical Examiner do?
A medical examiner is responsible for determining the cause and manner of death, and since I work in Vermont, I do that for people who die in Vermont. And we do this through investigation and also through doing autopsies and examining the bodies.
Okay. How many autopsies have you performed?
Probably somewhere near 2,700 or 3,000.
And have you performed autopsies from individuals who have died in a car accident?
Yes.
And do you know how many of those you've done?
Perhaps 300 or 400.
Okay. And have you been trained to determine if an injury is caused by that car crash?
Yes.
Okay. Were you involved with the autopsies of the 5 individuals in October of 2016 relating to a motor vehicle crash?
Yes.
And how did it occur? How did that occur that you became involved in that?
So I was notified shortly after the incident about the deaths and was in communication with my death investigator and also with the Vermont State Police detective who was serving as liaison to our office, and they were at the scene. And then the bodies came to the office of the chief medical examiner, and then I examined the bodies there and did the autopsies and issued reports.
Okay. Did you also identify the 5 individuals?
They were identified through our office, the office of the chief medical examiner, by our consulting forensic dentist who did a dental comparisons.
Okay. And were these 5 individuals Mary Harris, Cyrus Chou, Liam Hale, Mary Harris, and Eli Brookins?
Yes.
And who else was present during these autopsies?
My autopsy assistant and the Detective Sergeant Dennis from the state police, who's assigned to our office at the time.
And when you do an autopsy, do you complete a report afterwards?
Yes.
And what does that report show or describe in general?
The report documents the injuries, but also the identifying features of the person and also their natural diseases, if they have any. And then there are typically toxicology tests, which is looking in the blood to see if there are any drugs or medications or alcohol in their system.
Okay. And did you complete reports for these 5 autopsies?
Yes.
So I'm going to show you what have been marked as dates 58, 59, 60, 61, and 62. Do you recognize those?
Yes.
Okay. And what are those?
These are the 5 autopsy reports.
Okay. And are those a final and true and accurate copy of your final autopsy report?
Yes.
The state would move 57 through 62 into evidence.
58.
Sorry, 58.
Any objection?
No, Judge.
58, 59, 60, 61,
57, specifically the autopsy of Mary Harris. Did you determine the age of Miss Harris at the time of her death?
16 years.
And did you observe fatal injuries to Miss Harris during her autopsy?
Yes.
Can you describe those injuries?
She had fractures and injuries to major organs and vessels, and also to her brain.
Okay. And how were those injuries caused?
They were caused by blunt trauma.
Okay. To specific parts of her body?
They were the blunt injuries of her head and her torso.
Okay. How do you know that that's how they were caused?
So the types of injuries, the fractures and the injuries of the organs and vessels are from a physical force, striking or the body striking a object, and that's the definition of blunt trauma.
Okay. And were you able to determine a manner of death for Miss Harris?
Yes.
And what was that?
Homicide.
Okay. And can you explain to the jury what the difference between a cause of death and a manner of death is?
So the cause of death is the disease or the injury that starts the lethal sequence of events that causes the death. The manner of death describes the circumstances around that death. And for manner, we have the possibilities of natural, accident, homicide, suicide, and if we can't determine, we have an undetermined category as well.
Okay. And so specifically, what is, from the medical examiner's perspective, what does homicide mean as a manner of death?
So a homicide, for a medical examiner's determination, means death at the hands of another or caused by the hostile or illegal acts of another person.
Thank you. And were the injuries from the collision the sole cause of Mary Harris's death?
Yes.
And how did you make that determination?
By examining the outside and the inside of the body and documenting the injuries, and in this case, the absence of any other explanation beyond the blunt trauma caused by the impact of that collision.
Okay. And did the jury has heard testimony about the vehicle that Miss Harris was in at some point catching on fire? Did the fire in the vehicle play any part in Miss Harris's death?
No, it did not.
And how do you know that?
So she was ejected or thrown out of the vehicle, and she had no burns.
And looking next at states, I believe 59, the final autopsy of Cyrus Chou. Did you determine the age of Mr. Chou at the time of his death?
He was 16 years old.
And did you observe fatal injuries to Mr. Chou?
Yes.
And can you describe what those injuries were?
He too had fractures and internal injuries of major vessels and organs, and also brain injury.
And how were those injuries caused?
Also by blunt force trauma.
Okay. And also to the torso and head?
Yes.
And were you able to determine a manner of death for Mr. Chou?
Homicide.
And were the injuries from the collision the sole cause of his death?
They were most likely the sole cause.
Okay. And again, how did you make that determination?
By evaluating the injuries and also looking to see if the burning had any internal evidence that he was alive during the fire.
And so is that why you said most likely that you are, I don't want to put words in your mouth, why don't you tell me that why you aren't sure whether the collision itself was the most likely or likely cause.
So he certainly has severe blunt injuries from just the collision, and those are sufficient to be his cause of death. When a fire happens very fast, we can't necessarily exclude some contribution from the fire, but there's no evidence to suggest that he was taking any significant breaths during the fire.
Okay. And so I'll rephrase my question then. Is it your opinion that the collision or the resulting fire from the collision were the sole cause of his death?
Yes.
And as the driver of the vehicle, was there any toxicology testing done to determine whether he had any substances in his system?
Yes.
And were there any positive findings of toxicological significance?
No, there were not.
Okay. Looking next at the final autopsy of Liam Hale. Did you determine the age of Mr. Hale at the time of his death?
He was 16 years old.
And did you observe fatal injuries to Mr. Hale?
Yes.
And can you describe those injuries?
His injuries were just to his brain, and they're from the collision,
Okay. And so, again, how were those injuries caused?
from blunt trauma of his head,
And how do you know that?
by excluding other injuries unrelated to a collision or natural diseases unrelated to collision.
And did you determine a manner of death for Mr. Hale?
Homicide.
And again, were the injuries that you observed, were the injuries from the collision the sole cause of his death?
Most likely.
Okay. And is your answer most likely for the same reason
Yes.
as
he
Mr.
has
Chou?
significant injury of his brain, but it's difficult to exclude with absolute certainty a contribution from the fire.
Okay. So it's your opinion that the sole cause of death was the collision and or the resulting fire?
Yes.
Okay. Looking next at Jenny Cozy. Did you determine the age of Miss Cozy at the time of her death?
She was 15 years old.
And did you observe fatal injuries to Miss Cozy?
Yes.
Can you describe those injuries?
She had very extensive injuries of her head, her brain, and a great many internal organs and many fractures.
Okay. And again, how were those injuries caused?
Those are from blunt force trauma of the torso and the head.
Were you able to determine a manner of death for Miss Cozy?
Yes.
And what was that?
Homicide.
And again, were the injuries from the collision or the resulting fire the sole cause of her death?
Yes.
And finally, looking at Mr. Brookins, the final autopsy for Eli Brookins. Did you determine the age of Mr. Brookins at the time of his death?
He was 16 years old.
And did you observe fatal injuries to Mr. Brookins?
Yes.
What were they?
Those were blunt injuries, skull fractures, injuries of the brain, and injuries of the torso
And how were those injuries caused?
from blunt force trauma.
And were you able to determine a manner of death for Mr. Brookins?
Yes.
What was that?
Homicide.
And were the injuries from the collision or the resulting fire the sole cause of his death?
Yes.
And did you make that determination the same way you made it with the others?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll go on this. Thank you. As part of your training as a medical examiner, are you trained to identify injuries on a body and make an opinion about the cause of those injuries?
Yes.
Okay. And if you were to see a specific photograph or two photographs of a specific injuries on somebody's body who's alleged to have been the driver in a collision, could you give an opinion about the likely cause of that injury?
Yes.
So I'm going to show you. Well, first I'm going to do a stipulation, Your Honor, into the record. states 88. The stipulation is that the states 63 and 64 are photographs of Stephen Bourgoin taken on October 13th of 2016 by Vermont State Trooper Richard Stepien. These photographs are fair and accurate representation of Stephen Bourgoin on October 13th of 2016. As with any evidence in this trial, you must decide what weight you will give this stipulation. So I would move to enter states 88, the stipulation, as well as photographs 63 and 64.
No objection, Judge.
So 88, 63, and 64 are admitted.
So I'm going to show you what has been now admitted as states 63 and 64 photographs of Mr. Bourgoin on October 13th. This is 63 and 64. Seeing those photographs, are you able to make a determination about what the likely cause of those injuries was?
The image on the left, there's scratches or abrasions across the top of the shoulder that I have an opinion about how they occurred.
Okay. What was your opinion?
That those are consistent with a driver's side restraint.
And what would this one be consistent with?
This is an abrasion of the inner arm, and I can only say that it's from a blunt injury. I can't determine its cause.
Okay. So this one specifically you believe to have been, your opinion is that it was caused by a driver's side seatbelt. Is that correct?
It is consistent with that, yes.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions, Your Honor.
No problem, Judge.
Thank you. You're all set.
Seated.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Make sure you speak nice and loud into that microphone, please. Would you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Owen Ballinger, Ballinger.
And how are you employed?
I'm a trooper with the Vermont State Police.
Do you have any particular title?
Sergeant.
Okay. How long have you been employed with the Vermont State Police?
About 20 years.
And could you please tell the ladies and gentlemen a little bit about your educational background and training?
So I'm in charge of the crash reconstruction team. To become a reconstructionist, you have to take a 2-week at-scene crash investigation course, a 2-week technical level course, and a 2-week reconstruction level course. So in addition to those classes, I've taken additional classes in commercial motor vehicle accident investigation, as well as airbag control module downloads.
And did you attend any schooling? College?
Yes, I have a bachelor's degree from Champlain College.
Okay, and did you attend the academy as well?
Yes.
Okay. So, what are your current duties?
So my current job is I'm the crash reconstruction team leader. There's 2 full-time collision reconstructionists for the state police and 9 part-time. So I oversee that unit. In addition to that, I teach at the police academy. I teach a part-time crash investigation course, the full-time basic crash course, and the 2-week at-scene class.
How many crashes or accidents have you been involved in investigating?
Oh, I don't have an exact number.
Can you give us a ballpark?
Hundreds.
And how many head-on crashes or accidents have you been involved in, if you can give us a ballpark?
Again, I don't have a specific number. A lot, probably over 100.
So you told us that you actually teach crash investigation,
Correct.
and where do you teach it?
At the Vermont Police Academy.
Okay. And what about collision investigation? Is that the same thing? Or is that
Yes.
something different? Okay. And you talked about airbag control module imaging. Could you explain to the jury what that is, please?
Yes. So cars that have airbags have a module built into the vehicle, and it's essentially its purpose is to deploy the airbag. If conditions warrant, the module receives the command, and the airbags are deployed. A secondary function within the module is that it records electronic data, and it can record things like vehicle speed, whether or not seatbelts were being used, engine RPM, whether or not the brakes were being applied, those types of things.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as States Exhibit 65 and ask you if you recognize that.
Yes, that's my resume, my CV.
Okay. Your Honor, this time the state would move the CD into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Judge.
65 is admitted. Without objection.
Have you received any type of awards throughout your career as a crash investigator?
Yes. Yes, from the Burlington Police Department.
Okay. And do you belong to any professional associations?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
The Pennsylvania Collision Analysis Reconstruction Society, as well as the NAPARS, which is the North American Professional Accident Reconstruction Society.
Can you give us an idea over the course of your career how many different trainings you have attended with respect to the work you do?
Been to a lot of training and a lot of professional seminars, some of which are in-state, some of which are out-of-state.
And are they all listed on the exhibit that I just introduced, your CV?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned airbag control imaging. Have you taken any courses with respect to that?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell us what kind of courses you've taken?
Sure. So the first is a technician. A technician is a person who is able to image the airbag control module. So I've taken the technician level twice, and there's 3 companies that teach how to download the airbag, how to analyze the electronic data that you get from an airbag control module download, and I've taken training from all 3 of those companies.
Okay. Have you ever testified in court on crash reconstruction?
Yes.
And can you give us some of the courts you have testified in?
Orleans County, Franklin County, Addison County, Rutland County, Lamoille County.
And in each of those courts that you testified in, have you been qualified as an expert in traffic crash reconstruction?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, this time the state would move Trooper Bellinger as an expert in traffic crash reconstruction.
Any objection?
None, Judge.
Or we make that finding.
Okay, so let's talk generally about crash reconstruction. How is that different from accident reconstruction?
Those terms are synonymous.
They're synonymous, okay. So talk to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please, just generally what the purpose of crash reconstruction is.
So really, there's three sources of evidence in a traffic collision. There's evidence from humans, which would be the operators, the passengers, the witnesses, pedestrians. So that's one source of evidence. The second source of evidence would be from the vehicles. The vehicles can be a source of evidence, or they could be a cause of the crash. And then the third would be environmental factors like the roadway, the weather conditions. So really, crash investigation or collision reconstruction is just a matter of gathering the evidence and then interpreting the evidence to figure out what happened and just report it objectively.
So generally speaking, Trooper, when you go out to a crash scene, what is the first thing that you do?
The first thing that we would do is to survey the scene and see what we're looking at, and try to identify items that we would want to, that may be related to the collision.
Such as?
Position of the vehicles at final rest, whether or not they came to rest due to input from the operators, or if they just came to rest due to the force of the collision.
And why is that important, final rest?
Well, in certain cases, there are calculations that can be done to determine the minimum speed required to go from the area of impact to where the vehicles came to final rest.
Okay. And so, do you take measurements when you're out there on the scene?
Yes.
Okay. Measurements of what?
Again, we would take measurements of the positions of the vehicles, where they came to rest. We would want to identify how they got there. If you think about crash investigation, really what we do is we work backwards from what is known. We know where the cars came to rest, and we want to follow the path that they took to where they impacted each other, and then from there we want to go what they were doing prior to impact.
What is it that you're looking for when you're doing a crash investigation?
Again, just to figure out how these vehicles came together and ended up where they ended up.
Okay. So, what kind of physical evidence are you looking for when you're there at the scene?
So we're going to examine the vehicles. We're going to examine the contact damage to the vehicles, the damage that the vehicles sustained. We're also going to look for roadway evidence, things like tire marks, scratches and gouge marks on the road surface.
What is the significance of looking for tire marks?
Tire marks can give us an indication of vehicles' pre-impact path of travel as well as the post-impact path of travel.
And what about gouge marks? What's the significance of looking for those?
Excuse me. So in a frontal collision, vehicles have weight shift, where the weight transfers to the front of the vehicles, and that they're pushed down. And when oftentimes in a significant collision, the undercarriage will come into contact with the road surface, and it will leave scrapes and or gouges in the pavement. So it's important to locate those gouge marks and the corresponding damage of the vehicle, because then we can place the vehicles where they were at the time of impact.
Okay. And can you talk to us a little bit about maximum engagement, what that is?
So maximum engagement is it's where the forces of the collision are at their greatest. That's where the vehicles have come into contact, the metal components and the plastic pieces and the glass will break. And at maximum contact, that's where the forces are the greatest, and it's just prior to when the vehicles begin to separate and go off into where they come to rest.
And so all of these things that you've been telling us about, these are all being used as factors in determining what happened, what caused the crash?
Correct.
Okay. Do you ever do inspections of the vehicles off scene?
Yes.
And why would you do that?
It's nice to be able to examine the vehicles at the scene, but sometimes that's not possible. If we can bring the vehicles back to either an office, a state police barracks, or a garage where we can get them up off the ground so we can get underneath them and take photographs and try to identify components on the vehicle that came in contact with the road surface, so we can match up the damaged components of the vehicle with the roads, the marks on the road.
And in trying to figure out how a crash has happened, do you also talk about or try and figure out what the path of travel of each of those vehicles was?
Yes.
And how do you do that?
Well, again, it's kind of a combination of things. If there's pre-impact tire marks, it's a pretty good indication of how the vehicles were coming into the crash. Other times you have to rely on the damage profile of the vehicles, sort of match up the vehicles, how they came into contact over the gouges on the roadway, to position them to where they were at impact.
Okay. So is there any kind of electronic data that you use in trying to determine what happened with a crash?
Sometimes.
Okay, and can you tell us about that? Yeah, I think you had started to talk about the airbag control module. Can you tell us what kind of electronic data you get from that?
So again, in a vehicle that's equipped with an airbag, they have airbag control modules, and sort of a secondary function in those modules is that they record data such as pre-crash data. The airbag is an anticipatory system. The airbag deploys prior to impact. It doesn't do any good to have an impact and then deploy the airbag. So there's thresholds that are set by the vehicle manufacturer, and they say, if this condition warrants, deploy the airbag. So, and again, a secondary function within the module is that it records things like vehicle speed, engine RPMs, whether or not the brake was on or off. Some of the newer vehicles have how hard an operator was applying the brake, maybe steering input, whether or not the operator was inputting steering. It's really dependent on the year, make, and model of vehicle as far as what electronic data you can retrieve.
Okay, and again, you've been trained in getting that information and analyzing that information.
Correct.
Okay. So, well, before we move on, so you've got the airbag. How do you get the electronic data from that airbag? What do you do to get it out?
Okay, so you can plug into the vehicle's diagnostic port. That cable can be connected to an interface, which is then connected to my computer, and then software runs the program. So when the vehicle's electrical system is still functioning, that's the easiest way to do it, is just plug into the diagnostic port. If the electrical system doesn't work, you can if you can locate the module, sometimes you can plug directly into the module, and that cable would be connected to an interface module, which would be connected to the computer, and then the software would run and image the data contained within the module.
What is the software that you use?
So the majority of vehicles use what's called the Bosch Crash Data Retrieval System.
Okay. So let's now turn to this case. Did you become involved in an investigation involving someone named Stephen Bourgoin?
Yes.
And have you ever met Stephen Bourgoin?
No.
Okay. So how did you become involved in the investigation?
I received a phone call at my residence a little bit after midnight from Lieutenant Gary Scott, who told me that there was a real disaster.
And so where were you living at the time?
Newport.
So how long, did you leave immediately to get down to the scene?
Yes.
Did Lieutenant Scott tell you where it had occurred?
Yep, he said it was on Interstate 89 in Ballista.
And how long did it take you to get there, do you remember?
A little less than 2 hours.
Okay. And when you did you actually go to the scene?
Yes.
Okay. And when you got to the scene, were you briefed as to what had happened there?
Yes, I met with Lieutenant Scott, and he told me that there was a collision involving a wrong-way driver, and that there were several fatalities as a result of that collision, and that a responding police officer's cruiser had been stolen, driven the wrong way on the interstate, and came back through the scene and crashed into one of the vehicles that had been involved in the initial collision.
Okay. So there were, according to what you've been told, there were 2 crashes that night?
Correct.
Okay. At this time, Your Honor, the state would like to read a stipulation into the record. It's marked State's Exhibit 89. Members of the jury, the state and defendant, Stephen Bourgoin, have agreed that you may find certain facts. This is called a stipulation. State's 66 is a PowerPoint presentation that will not be entered into evidence but will be used for demonstrative purposes to aid in the testimony of Trooper Owen Ballinger and retired Trooper Michael Sorensen. This PowerPoint presentation includes many photographs that were used by the crash reconstruction team to form their opinion. These photographs were taken by the Vermont State Police. They were taken in a timely manner, and they are fair and accurate representations of what they show. As with any evidence in this trial, you must decide what weight you will give this stipulation.
Okay, so any objection to the stipulation
No
of
objection.
facts in 89?
No objection.
Okay. For the use of the PowerPoint in 66?
No objection.
Okay.
So, just for clarification purposes, you worked with Corporal Sorensen on this crash investigation?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and we'll hear from him tomorrow. So tell us what this is here.
That's a picture of Interstate 89. It's the 2 southbound lanes. It's looking at the scene to the north.
And is that a photograph you took, or did somebody else take that?
Someone else took that.
Okay, and do you know approximately what time it was taken?
No.
Okay. And what about this?
So that's the scene. Again, it's the 2 southbound lanes of Interstate 89 in Williston, and it's facing northbound. That's the scene of where the collision occurred.
Okay. And you indicate that the white fog line, tell us what you're indicating here about the scene description.
So when traveling south, there's a slight uphill grade. The travel lane is going to be, well, as you're looking at the picture, the travel lane is on the left and the passing lane is on the right. So the white fog line indicates that that's the travel lane, and then the yellow fog line on the right of the screen would indicate that it's the passing lane.
Okay. So you had testified earlier that it took you about 2 hours to get to the scene that night, and you got a call about midnight. So did you arrive on scene approximately 2 a.m.?
Yes.
And how long did you stay on scene?
I stayed on scene all that night until mid-morning the next day.
Okay. What does this depict? Slide number 3.
So again, this is the scene the night of the incident. It's depicting the 2 southbound lanes near the area of impact.
And how do you know that's the area of impact?
If you look on the right side of the screen, there's you can see the grass along the edge of the roadway. And there's a break in the grass, which was where the Volkswagen departed the interstate and went down into the median.
And what does this depict?
This is another photograph that was taken the night of the collision. It depicts the area of impact. So there is the white dashed center line, which separates the travel lane from the passing lane as one travels south on I-89. It shows gouge marks in the travel lane. It shows scratches on the road surface that were as a result of the Volkswagen being pressed down at impact. And it also shows the post-impact direction of the Volkswagen as it crossed the passing lane and went off into the median.
So as far as you could tell from your investigation, where did the area of impact between the two vehicles actually take place?
It took place in the southbound travel lane, very near the center of the roadway.
And what is this a picture of?
Again, that's a picture of the area of impact. It has a little bit clearer definition of the area of impact. There's a gouge mark which is kind of in the center of the screen, but maybe down and to the right. That gouge mark was caused by the right front tire of the Volkswagen at impact.
And how do you know that?
Based on our examination of the physical evidence on the roadway, and then examining the Volkswagen, later on we found that the right front tire had a piece of the rim that was broken, which corresponds to that mark in the road.
And this says Jetta post-impact path of travel. Tell us about that.
So that's debris as a result of the impact that was deposited along that post-impact path of travel, kind of down through the grassy median.
And is it your understanding that the Jetta is the vehicle that carried the 5 teenagers that were killed?
Yes.
Okay. And what do we see in this picture? What is all that?
It's just broken components from the vehicles involved.
Okay. So at this point, you know that the area of impact occurred somewhere very close to the center line in the travel lane,
Correct.
okay, and southbound travel lane.
Correct.
And you know where the Jetta went after impact.
Correct.
Do you know how far back the Jetta was pushed as a result of the impact?
I don't recall.
Okay. So you started to talk a little bit about taking measurements at the scene of a crash investigation. What measurements did you take in this particular case?
So in this particular case, I used what's called a total station, which is the same thing that a surveyor would use.
Can you describe that for us, please? What that looks like and what it does?
Yep, it uses a laser to measure distances, and it's set up on a tripod. So the tripod was set up along the edge of the road, and then I used it to measure the vehicles at their positions of rest, the gouge marks, the lane markings on the interstate, the road width, that type of thing.
Okay, and is that a total station tested for accuracy?
Yes, so the first measurement is usually taken to a known distance. So we use a steel tape measure. We'll measure out a distance, say 20 feet. The first measurement that we use with the total station is to that 20-foot known distance. And we take all of our scene measurements, and the last measurement that we take prior to closing out the scene is again to that known distance.
Okay. So tell us then, please, what exactly the measurements were that you took throughout the night and into the next day.
Well, the measurements were of the vehicles at their positions of rest, the roadway, the lane markings, the gouge marks, and then all the other vehicles that were involved in the subsequent collision.
Did you find any evidence of skid marks in the I-89 where the impact had occurred?
No.
Okay. And does that indicate anything to you in particular, the absence of skid marks?
It just indicates that neither vehicle had braked sufficiently hard or sufficiently long enough to deposit skid marks on the road surface.
So when you arrived at the scene on the early morning hours, I guess, of October 9th at around 2 a.m., were the vehicles still on the scene?
Yes.
Can you tell us what this is a picture of?
No, that's a picture of the Volkswagen at final rest.
Okay, and this was, can you tell us where in relation to the interstate it was?
It was in the median.
Were you made aware of who the vehicle was registered to?
Not that night at the scene, as part of the investigation later on, yes.
Do you remember who it was registered to?
Cyrus Zazu, I believe, was the...
Sal?
Sal.
Okay. Okay. All right. And were you aware whether Cyrus Sal was actually driving the vehicle at the time of the impact?
I believe we determined as part of our investigation that he was.
And what is that a picture of?
That's a picture of the front of the Volkswagen that was involved in the collision.
Okay, and what are the green markings there on the bottom?
The green markings are spray paint, which indicate the position in the median where that car came to rest.
And again, this picture?
This is a picture of the driver's side looking from the rear to the front of the Volkswagen.
Was it your understanding that the Jetta had actually caught on fire?
Yes,
And was the fire out by the time you got there?
mostly.
And what is this a picture of?
That's a picture of the right rear of the Volkswagen, and in between the trunk and that rear quarter panel is grass.
What is the importance or significance of that?
So that indicated that at a certain point, that corner of the vehicle came in contact with the grass.
And do you know how it came in contact with grass?
So again, when we do our investigation, the one thing we know is where the cars ended up, where they are at final rest. So we worked from where they were back towards the area of impact, and we could see scraping in the grass, and the grass was flattened down. So it became apparent that that vehicle had overturned prior to it coming to rest, which is how that grass got trapped in between the trunk and that quarter panel.
To your knowledge, did that VW Jetta have a sunroof or moonroof?
I believe it had a sunroof.
And were you made aware that one of the passengers, Mary Harris, had actually been ejected from the vehicle?
Yes.
Do you have any assumptions or presumptions or opinions as to how she would have gotten ejected?
I think that she was in the middle of the back seat, not restrained, and I think that when the vehicle rolled over, she was ejected through the sunroof.
So, tell us what this picture is, please.
That is a picture of the Toyota Tacoma.
Can you tell which direction it's facing from that picture?
So we're looking at the two southbound lanes of Interstate 89. The passing lane is on our right, the travel lane would be on our left, and it's facing towards the travel lane. It's kind of it's difficult to see in this picture. It's pretty dark, but it's the front of the Toyota is facing towards the travel lane.
And by the time you got there, the second crash had already occurred?
Correct.
Okay. Were you made aware of who actually owned that 2012 Toyota Tacoma?
Not that night.
Okay. At some point, did you learn who owned it?
Yes.
Who did?
I don't recall.
Okay. Was it Stephen Bourgoin?
Not that I recall.
Okay. So did you inspect the Tacoma on scene while you were there?
Yes, I mean, we did a visual examination of the exterior of the vehicle just to see what type of contact damage it had sustained.
And again, that was in conjunction with your investigation, trying to figure out how this happened?
Yes.
I know it might be a little difficult to see. Is that also the Tacoma?
Yes, that's another picture of the driver's side of the Tacoma. It's just a little bit closer.
And is that an airbag?
Yes.
You see? And this?
That's a little bit better picture of the driver's side of the Toyota Tacoma where it came to rest after the second collision.
Is there a part of that truck that's missing?
I believe the bed was missing.
And what is this?
This is the contact damage that the Toyota Tacoma sustained as a result of impacting the Volkswagen.
Well, can you distinguish what damage was caused by the impact with the Jetta versus the impact with the Cruiser?
So through our investigation, we determined that the Toyota Tacoma was traveling the wrong way on the interstate and impacted the Volkswagen in an offset head-on manner.
What do you mean offset head-on manner?
So it wasn't completely straight. There was a little bit of an angle to it, which caused the vehicles to both rotate and then separate. And then when the Williston Police Cruiser came back through and impacted the side of the Tacoma, it caused it to go further north to where it came to this position of rest.
So is it correct to say that is this the front end?
Yes.
That the front end damage here was caused by the first crash?
Yes.
What is this?
This is it's a picture again of the front of the Toyota Tacoma, looking at the front of it as well as the passenger side.
And could you tell us again, I may have already asked this, where was the final resting position of the Tacoma by the time you got there after the second crash?
Right here. This is where it was. It's kind of off the. We're looking at, if we were all on the interstate, that yellow line is the passing lane. So it's partially in the passing lane with the rear of it towards the median, facing the travel lane.
Were there other vehicles at the scene when you got there in addition to the Jetta and the Tacoma?
Yes.
Okay. And is this another picture of the Tacoma?
Yes, it is.
What is this a picture of?
This is a picture showing the damage to the passenger side.
And is it your understanding that the Cruiser's impact with the pickup truck occurred on the passenger side or on the driver's side?
I believe it was the passenger side.
And this, what is this?
This is another picture of the passenger side of the Tacoma with the damage to the bed as well.
Has that vehicle been separated into two parts? Or is that still one part?
It's missing a lot of pieces.
Okay. All right, so you said that there were other vehicles on scene other than the Tacoma and the Jetta, and this is, what is this?
That's the Williston police cruiser.
And this is it's your understanding this is the cruiser that was used by the defendant to strike his own truck on his way back?
Correct.
Were you made aware of who was actually driving that cruiser, who stole the cruiser?
Yes.
And it was the defendant?
Correct.
Okay. Did you inspect that vehicle on scene?
Again, just a cursory examination of the contact damage that it sustained to try to get an understanding of how that collision occurred.
And where was the final position of rest for that cruiser?
It was still in the southbound lane of Interstate 89. It was further north of the initial impact scene, of the area of impact between the Tacoma and the Volkswagen. So it was further north, and it was again in the passing lane facing towards the travel lane.
And was it your understanding that the cruiser at one point had actually caught on fire?
Yes.
Okay. So while you were there in the early morning hours of October 9th, did you start taking your measurements then?
Yes.
And did you take any photos that night? Or
After I had finished taking measurements, the sun had come up, so I grabbed my camera and I took some daytime photos.
okay. So we're now sunup, right, on October 9th? Is that correct?
No, that was taken a little later on a subsequent trip to the scene.
Okay. So tell us, did you take this photo?
I believe Corporal Sorensen did.
So tell us what we're looking at here then.
So we're looking at the area of impact between the Toyota and the Volkswagen. You can still see some of the spray paint marks that were on the road surface that indicated some of the scratching and some of the gouging that showed the post-impact path of travel for the Volkswagen.
And what is that white line that's perpendicular to the
So
line
that's-
in the road?
That's just a measuring device which just shows the direction that the Volkswagen took post-impact.
And what is the black line that goes across the roadway?
That's just a crack sealant.
And again, where the box says area of impact, that's where you're putting the area of impact on the roadway?
The area of impact is indicated by the big red box
Okay.
which shows the green spray paint marks and the scratching.
And what is this a picture of?
That's just a close-up of some of the scratches and gouges that were on the road surface.
And again, that becomes important later on as you're making comparisons with the vehicles that you inspect back at the barracks?
Correct.
Okay. And the green color, that's just markings that by someone who's just taking measurements?
Yes, I spray painted those areas to include when I was mapping the scene.
I'm going to, if I may approach you, Hunter, I'm going to give you a laser pointer. So maybe you can point to the pictures better so you understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so give us, please point with the laser pointer where the area of impact was.
So So this is the southbound travel lane. This is the southbound passing lane. I believe this gouge mark right here, which I marked with these 3 dots of spray paint, was from the right front tire of the Volkswagen, which would put the position of the Volkswagen partially in this southbound travel lane.
Okay. And we're back again to the crash. What is the significance of what you're trying to show us here?
Okay, so this is how the road looked the night of the crash. Again, this is the southbound travel lane. This is the southbound passing lane. There's the gouge mark that was caused by the right front tire of the Volkswagen, which we were able to determine that the position of the Volkswagen at the time of impact was partially in this southbound travel lane.
Okay. So you're familiar with 89 of this section?
Yes.
Of the roadway? So are there breakdown lanes on either side of the road there?
There are.
And is the roadway, does it curve, is it straight? Can you tell us?
Well, as you're traveling southbound on 89, you go past the southbound Williston Rest area, the road curves or slopes downward. It's relatively straight. It levels out, and then it starts to slope upwards some before you go downhill and go down into an area which is known as French Hill. So it's a relatively straight section of road.
And what is this?
So this is another photograph of the scene that was taken, and it shows the scratching on the road surface, as well as the disturbance in the grass next to the edge of the road, which showed the departure path of the Volkswagen that came to rest down in this area of the median.
So what do the scratches show you, the arrow, that the red arrows are pointing to? What does that tell you?
It just shows the path of travel that the Volkswagen took down.
So with the laser pointer, can you show us where the Jetta would have been at impact before the path of travel it took landing in the median? Were you able to show us?
Not from this picture.
Okay. How about that one?
So again, here is the right front tire, or the gouge in the roadway, which was caused by the rim from the right front tire of the Volkswagen, and then it was pushed this way off the edge of the road where those scratches were in the other photograph we were just looking at, and then it went down into the median down here.
And this again is a picture of the grass that was caught in the back part.
Correct. So this area right here, where the trunk meets that rear quarter panel, had grass from the median trapped in it. So that's what this arrow is showing, is just the grass that's caught.
Okay. So what is this?
So this is, this right here is an antenna that we found in the median. That particular Volkswagen has a roof mount antenna, so that would indicate that that the vehicle rolled over and that this and the grass that was caught in the trunk and the marks in the median indicated that the Volkswagen had overturned, depositing the antenna where we found it in the grass there, and that explains how the grass got caught in between the trunk and the quarter panel.
So this vehicle one which is the Tacoma.
Correct. This is the damage to the front of the Tacoma.
Okay, talk to us please about the boxes that you have with the arrows.
So this is the driver's side of the Tacoma, and this is the passenger side. There's normally an aluminum bumper that goes from the driver's side to the passenger side. A piece of that aluminum is missing, but the bumper mounts are still there. So here's the left front bumper mount, and here's the right front bumper mount. It also shows that the damage is not completely flat all across the front of the vehicle. It kind of is a little deeper on the passenger side than it is on the driver's side.
And what does that indicate to you?
So again, that just tells us that it's not a complete head-on collision, that there's a little bit of an angle to it. There's a little bit of an offset to it.
And then please continue with what this shows.
So this is still the Tacoma. Again, we're looking at the front of it. Here's the windshield. Here's the driver's door, which is bent backwards. But this right front fender is sort of pushed towards the passenger side, and which again would indicate that there was some type of rotation. And then there's some more areas like these bumper mounts, how they're kind of pushed down towards the road surface, which would leave scratches indicating the direction of travel that it went after impact.
And please continue with this slide.
So we're still looking at the Tacoma. This is the passenger side of the Tacoma. These are the side curtain airbags that have deployed. This is the damage as a result of the Williston police cruiser being driven into the side of it, and a large portion of the truck bed is missing.
Did you ever see where the truck bed went?
It came to rest down in the median.
Okay. Were you able to determine whether what type of collision occurred between the cruiser and the pickup truck in the second crash? You had talked to us about offset and not quite head-on, but were you able to determine what kind of collision occurred there?
Yes, the cruiser was driven into the passenger side of the Tacoma.
A direct hit into the passenger side?
Yes.
And this is?
This is the Toyota Tacoma. This is the driver's side, which shows you're looking at the left rear wheel, where there's the bumper and the bed is missing. This is the back of the cab.
So let's now get to the barracks after were the vehicles, all three vehicles towed to the barracks?
They were.
And at that point, it was your intention to inspect them further to further your crash investigation?
Yes.
Okay. And this says vehicle 2. Which vehicle is that?
That's the Volkswagen.
And is that the way it presented at the crash scene the night after the crash? Or did you do anything to this?
Well, the fire department had to remove the roof to extricate the victims.
Okay. All right. So what is the significance of just looking at this as part of your crash investigation?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we want to look at the undercarriage of the vehicle to see if we can identify any components that may have come into contact with the road surface. So we jacked it up so we could get underneath it and take some photographs under there.
So, again, you've got here the area of impact and the gouges and the scratches and the smearing. And we've talked a little bit about that. Are we going to see what you found in your inspection after you put it up on a forklift?
Yes.
Okay. And again, this is more measurements again. Talk to us about this.
So this is the gouge mark right here. that was in the southbound travel lane. And that the night of the collision, I put these spots of spray paint next to the gouge marks so I could measure it using the total station. So I know that it went from here to here to here, so I'll have the distance and sort of the shape of it. So we examined the gouge mark, and then we examined the vehicle to see what component on the vehicle would have left a shape like that on the road surface.
Does determining the area of impact tell you anything about path of travel of the vehicles?
Yes, I mean, the area of impact, if we can place the vehicles at the area of impact, we will have an understanding of where they were at the time they came together.
So now, is this the Jetta that we're looking at here?
Yes, this is the right front tire of the Volkswagen.
Okay, and what is that telling you?
So if you look, this is the right front tire here, and this is the rim. And there's a piece of the rim that is missing from here to here.
Okay. And what is that? What's the significance of that?
Well, I believe we measured it, and I want to, if I recall correctly, it was approximately 8 inches from this break to this break, which corresponded to the gouge mark that we had on the road surface.
Okay. And talk to us about this slide.
Yep. So there is the there's the measurement. So from this piece of aluminum that's broken to this piece of aluminum that's broken, it's between 7 to 8 inches using our scale.
So if I understand correctly, basically what you're trying to do is match up what you saw on scene with the physical evidence you're seeing of the vehicles themselves.
Correct.
To help better understand the area of impact and all the other things you need to decide.
Correct.
Okay. And now we're back to the smearing.
Correct. So there's the rim gouge, but there are these other marks on the road surface. So we try to look at the underside of the vehicle to figure out what would have left those marks on the road surface.
And when you, let's go into this one now. What is this about?
So this is the undercarriage of the vehicle. Again, there's that right front tire, and this is part of the frame of the vehicle. But if you look right here, some of this, it was like a gray undercoating or a soundproofing that they put on the bottom of the frame, and some of that had been rubbed off, so you could see that the undercarriage had come in contact with something which corresponded to the marks that we were seeing on the road surface.
Is there a difference between area of impact and maximum engagement?
Well, the area of impact refers to the area where the collision occurred, and maximum engagement is more talking about that's where the forces of the collision are at the greatest, and that's where you would find the area of impact.
Okay, is this a diagram that you prepared?
I think this is a diagram that Corporal Sorensen prepared.
Can you just tell us, please, what it depicts?
So, using the measurements that we obtained from the total station, we can import them into computer software, so we can create diagrams, and from the diagrams we can take measurements. So, this is where the Volkswagen came to rest in the median. This is the southbound travel lane, and this is the southbound passing lane. So the northbound lanes would be over here, but this is the area of impact between the Toyota and the Volkswagen, and then the Volkswagen went along this way and came to rest, and the Toyota came to rest up here, but that was after it had been impacted by the Williston Police Cruiser, which came to rest up here, and then these were all the other cars that were involved at their positions of rest.
So the pickup truck started down at the bottom of that diagram, and by the time the second crash had occurred, it got moved that far up?
Correct.
And what was your understanding of where what lane the pickup truck was going the wrong way before the first crash?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. What is your understanding of what lane the pickup truck was in going the wrong way just prior to the first impact?
Well, I believe prior to the Toyota impacting the Volkswagen, it had been traveling northbound in the southbound lanes.
The passing lane?
I don't know exactly whether it was the passing lane or the travel lane.
Okay. And so here's maximum gauge. Talk to us about that, please.
So based on, this is the Tacoma, and this is the Volkswagen. So the Tacoma's vehicle 1 and the Volkswagen's vehicle 2. This is the southbound travel lane. This is the southbound passing lane. This is this line right here is the center line, and then this would be the edge of the roadway. But matching up the damage profiles of the vehicle would indicate that the vehicles came into contact in a manner that looks like this, where the Volkswagen is mostly in this travel lane, and the Tacoma is coming north in the travel lane, kind of going towards the passing lane.
And again, what did you use in order to arrive at this diagram? What information did you use?
So we took the total station and we mapped the exterior profile of the vehicles. So we mapped along the damage. As I said, they didn't come together head on. It was a little bit offset. So we mapped the exterior portions of the vehicles and then placed them together. And this is the way they fit together.
And this, what is this?
So this is the result of mapping the scene and using the program to create a diagram. This is the area of impact. This is the path that vehicle 2 took, post-impact, and this is where the Volkswagen came to rest, over here.
I believe you had testified that based on your investigation, the Volkswagen had flipped over. Did it land back on its tires?
It did.
Okay. All right. Your Honor, this might be a good time to break before we get into the data.
Okay, so why don't we take a 15-minute recess, and then we'll be back in the room.